All right, today we are jumping into one of the most epic stories in all of history. We're talking about the 600-year saga of the Ottoman Empire, a power that stretched across 3 continents and literally changed the world as we know it.
And what's so wild about this story is that it starts with, well, almost nothing. Just a small tribe of warriors out on the plains. They had no gold, no massive army. All they had was a vision. And somehow, from that one dream, they built something that would last for 6 centuries.
So that's the big question, right? How in the world did they pull that off? How does a small group of people, starting from scratch, rise up to command one of the greatest powers in history? Well, let's get into it. To really get this story, we have to start in a world that was completely falling apart. You see, to understand how the Ottomans rose, you first have to understand the broken, chaotic world they were born into. It was a land just crying out for a new leader. So, take a look at this. By the end of the 1200s, Anatolia, what we now call Turkey, was a mess. The huge Seljuk Empire had been completely smashed by the Mongols, and the legendary Byzantine Empire? Yeah, it was a ghost of its former self, weak and fractured. This created a massive power vacuum. It was just a dangerous landscape of warring tribes with no one in charge to keep people safe. And right into the middle of all that chaos steps a tribal leader named Osman. Now, he wasn't the richest guy around, not by a long shot, but he had something way more valuable. He had a vision. He wanted to build a homeland, a safe place for his people. And because of that, people didn't follow him for money. They followed him because he gave them a purpose. Okay, so a vision is one thing, but actually building a state? That's a whole other ballgame. Osman lit the spark, absolutely. But it was his son, Orhan, who really started to forge the empire. This guy wasn't just another warrior, he was a nation builder. And the big turning point comes in 1326. When they capture the city of Bursa, everything changes. It was a game changer. Suddenly, they weren't a wandering tribe anymore. They were a settled kingdom. For the very first time, they had a capital city, a real center for money, power, and government. This was the foundation for everything to come. And Orhan built on that foundation with a brilliant blueprint for how to run a state. He created a professional army, a tax system that was actually fair, and, this is huge, he guaranteed freedom of religion. In a world full of chaos and persecution, offering stability, justice, and tolerance was, well, it was revolutionary. It made talented people want to join the Ottomans, not run away from them. And then comes this next move. It's kind of quiet, but it is massive. The Ottomans set foot in Europe for the very first time. And they don't do it with some huge invasion, no. They do it by being clever, by helping a Byzantine prince who was stuck in a civil war. Their payment? A little piece of land in Europe, a tiny foothold that would change the course of history forever. But as you know, with great power and fast expansion come even bigger challenges. The next generation would see the empire soar to incredible new heights, only to face a clash of titans, a storm so big it would threaten to wipe out everything they had built. Now, Orhan's son, Murad I, he takes things up a notch. He's the one who starts calling himself Sultan. And look, this wasn't just a fancy new title, it was a statement. It meant the Ottomans weren't just some regional power anymore. No, they were a true royal empire, and their ruler held both worldly and spiritual authority. And to back up that new title, Murad creates one of the most legendary military units in history, the Janissaries. These guys were an elite fighting force trained from childhood to be brutally effective soldiers, disciplined and loyal only to one person, the Sultan. For hundreds of years, these guys would be the unstoppable core of the Ottoman army. All of this sets the stage for an absolutely epic showdown. So Murad's son, Bayezid, was called the Lightning because his armies were just so unbelievably fast. He was tearing through Europe. But coming from the east, a different kind of storm was brewing, the ruthless warlord Timur, also known as Tamerlane. You had 2 titans, 2 massive egos, and let's just say the world wasn't big enough for both of them. And they finally met at the Battle of Ankara in 1402. Bayezid the Lightning was super confident, maybe a little too confident, because Timur was a master of strategy. He had turned some of Bayezid's own men against him before the battle even started. The unthinkable happened. The unstoppable Sultan was betrayed, defeated, and taken prisoner. And just like that, in a single battle, the empire broke. The man who ruled one of the most powerful empires on the planet was now a captive in a cage.
everything was shattered. What came next was a full decade of absolute chaos. Bayezid's sons started a vicious civil war, tearing the empire apart to see who would rule the ashes. This period, the Ottoman interregnum, was the closest they ever came to total annihilation. The dream was about to die.
But after 10 long, bloody years, one of the brothers, Mehmed I, finally came out on top. He defeated his siblings, and then he patiently, piece by piece, stitched the broken empire back together again. He wasn't a conqueror like his father. His role was maybe even more important. He was the saver. Without him, the Ottoman story would have ended right there.
So, with the empire reborn, a new, incredibly ambitious generation set their sights on the ultimate prize. The one city that was a living legend. The city that had laughed at conquerors for 1,000 years. Constantinople. I mean, just let that number sink in. For over 1,100 years, the walls of Constantinople had held. They had never been permanently breached. This wasn't just a city, it was the city, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, and everyone thought it was unconquerable. But the new Sultan Mehmed II was obsessed. He took the throne when he was just 19 years old, and he had one single, all-consuming goal. History didn't scare him. He was going to make history. And his plan to do it was frankly audacious. He didn't just show up and fight. Oh no. He had a giant cannon built, the biggest the world had ever seen. He built a fortress to cut the city off from any help by sea. And then, and this part is just genius, he had his entire navy of warships dragged over a hill on greased logs, right into the city's protected harbor. Unbelievable! And so, after a brutal 53-day siege on May 29, 1453, the impossible happened. The legendary walls were breached, the city fell, and on that day, the 1,000-year-old Byzantine Empire was gone forever. For many historians, that moment is the real end of the Middle Ages. So let's just step back for a second. This whole story, this incredible rise from chaos, this patient state building, the near total collapse, and then this impossible rebirth, what does it all mean? What can we take away from it? You know, the story of the Ottomans is this amazing reminder that where you start doesn't have to be where you end up. They show us that real strength isn't just about winning battles, it's about building things that last and having the grit to get back up after you've been knocked flat. They started as a tiny tribe in a broken world and built a legacy that shaped history. It really proves that empires can rise from nothing. So the only real question left is, what will you build?